extension of the natural nurse and Dr. Z. This is Dr. Z, and I'm really glad that you're joining us for this great discussion with Dr. Michaël Friedman. We're going to be talking about his book, There's No Pill for This, Naturopathic's Personal Prescription for Managing Multiple Sclerosis. And so since his diagnosis of multiple sclerosis a decade ago, Dr. Michaël Friedman has been searching for a cure for the disease, and after years of research, he realized that he had some of the answers right in his naturopathic medicine toolbox, and surprisingly, some lay in the realm of conventional medicine. There's no pill for this. His latest book tells his story and offers treatment advice and hope for those who suffer from multiple sclerosis. A little bit about Dr. Friedman. He began his healing journey, believe it or not, as a patient of mine, and I encouraged him to go to naturopathic school, and he became a naturopathic physician, graduating from the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine in Toronto, Canada, and got licensed as a ND and became the founder of the Association for the Advancement of Restorative Medicine. And he also is the president of Restorative Formulation Supplement Company, which makes amazing herbal medicine, and he's the author of the medical textbook Fundamentals of Naturopathic Endocrinology and co-author of Healing Diabetes, and has worked with myself and the natural nurse in formulating various herbal formulas for autoimmune disease. And in the book, he's not promising a miracle cure, of course, but instead provides personal prescriptions he follows daily that have radically improved his quality of life, which we'll get into: diet, supplement, detox, hormone strategies, mindfulness, being organized, and a wide range of beneficial lifestyle adjustments related to exercise, sleep routines, stress management, and more. It's a very complex disease, Dr. Friedman says in his book, and he offers a lot of insight, and we look forward to having him on the program right now. Dr. Friedman, it's great to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Happy New Year.
You too.
How's your New Year?
It's great to see you. Oh, so far so good. You know, it's been good. So, I was reading your book, and as someone that's your friend and colleague, and someone that was actually your doctor at one point, it was really enlightening and also very heart-wrenching to see all the things that you've been through. Tell us a little bit about your healing Odyssey and what prompted you to write the book.
Well, what prompted to write the book was an easier answer. I was speaking at a conference, and someone from a publisher saw me lecture, and she thought my stories were interesting. Although I wasn't talking about myself, she just thought I was a good storyteller of medicine, and so she asked if I'd be interested in writing another book from another publisher, and initially she wanted me to write. Initially, we're going to talk about adding to my endocrinology book, but I just felt like I didn't feel it. I was like, I didn't feel close to it anymore, and I wasn't into it really. And then, but it took a few more years, and then one day, like 2-3 years later, I'm like, I know what I want to write about. I want to write about my story, because that's something I can relate to. It's a little more personal, and just writing dry scientific study about hormones was actually at the moment seemed a little boring to me. So I thought it was much more exciting to write about this. And after I wrote it, I recognized that I didn't really know what I was going into, but a lot of people liked the book in a different way that, like the publisher ended up finding it's the families who like buying the book, because it helped them understand what it's like to be a patient of MS, and gave them a lot more sympathy and awareness of how hard it can be. So that's kind of how I wrote the book. My Odyssey kind of started is that, I've had symptoms honestly since I was even in high school, with some learning difficulties and certain things I was really smart at, but certain things I had a hard time with. I remember in high school, my friends used to joke with me that I didn't feel pain. My buddy, Eric Stevens, he has a picture in high school where they did a flame torch and put it on my belly. Look, he feels no pain. And I was like, I don't feel it. And I think that really was kind of one of my first symptoms, about not feeling pain, they're like, the joke was in high school is that I had no nerve endings. And I kind of figured out a little later why.
Wow. So I noticed that, I know you spent, when we met, you had just got back from India and you were pretty sick from having all kinds of, experiences, maybe eating bad food, maybe picking up parasites and things like that. How do you think that impacted your illness, if any?
It was life-changing because I met you. I mean, that was absolutely. I mean, really. I mean, the parasites was one thing, but when I came back, I lost a lot of weight. I was like 125 pounds or something like that. I'm middle-aged now and I'm 185, but I was skinny, and I just wasn't able to get my gut back to normal. And I went to I went to the MDs and gastroenterologists, and it just really never settled down. And then I met you, and it settled down, and that's kind of really where part of my story started was that you treated me for my gut, but my allergies got better. And I'm like, because in regular medicine, I always think things have side effects, but I was like, oh, this has side benefits.
I like that.
Side benefits is way better than side effects. And at the time, I was actually thinking about going to regular medicine. And I was like, and I was pretty half and half about whether I go regular medicine or naturopathic medicine. But when I saw that there were side benefits to treating something, I was pretty stoked, and that's what kind of inspired me to go into naturopathic medicine.
Cool. And then, but then you go through the book, and then you went through a hard program, and you started to have very strange symptoms like fatigue and lethargy. And what's interesting about your discussion of MS is it seems to be the great masquerader of diseases. Like, you could have neurological problems, you can have memory problems, you can have energy problems, you can have problems walking and seeing and thinking, like I talked about. And those can be looked at as like, it's like the whole story where the blind man feels the elephant's trunk. One says it's a snake. Once, that story? Yeah. So it was similar to that in reading your story, putting the pieces together.
I went to a urologist. One of my symptoms was that I had to pee a lot. So, and I went to, and my urination, some issues actually started even in high school. I remember I had to pee a lot too, but I had to pee a lot. And then I went to my professor who did Chinese medicine, and said I had some kidney insufficiency, and he tried acupuncture for a year. And honestly, it really just kept on getting worse. And then I saw a urologist, and the urologist said, oh, you have a urinary infection. So he took antibiotics, and it helped. But the urgency and urinary retention kind of kept going even after I treated that. But then he's like, oh, you just have an unusual case of, prostatitis or something. And but it never occurred to him that it was MS. And I saw a urologist recently. He said a lot of MS patients, that's their first symptom for a man is this urinary frequency.
Wow. That's interesting. As I continue to teach urology class that we started teaching at UB,
Yeah.
So I do mention that to students after, hearing that from you in one of our discussions. So, so tell me some of the things that one story, you were driving on the wrong side of the road and had no idea that you were doing it. I mean, it was funny.
Well, yeah,
and not just being Michaël,
Well,
the way you are, because quite honestly, knowing you're kind of a, you're a court jester of medicine, I think, and you're it's hard to separate some of these crazy things from yourself.
Yeah, that's well, when I was after high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with work and everything. And it's before I went to college, and I drove for a school bus. So I drove school.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I was driving my school kids. I was still a teenager, and I got my license. I was 19. I had a public service license, driver's license, and I drove kids, and I drove I drove kids to death near east of Hartford, and I only had 2 kids. And one day when I came back, I was just coming back to my home and where I was living in Thomaston, and I was with one kid, and I couldn't remember where he lived, and I couldn't remember what to do with the stop sign. And then I was like, what do I do with a stop sign? I kept on flipping it. Does stop mean stop or go? Does red mean stop? Does green mean go? And then I just kept on thinking about it. And then while thinking about it, time would lapse, and then the light would change, and the light would change, and the cars were honking. And I was like, I can't remember what is which, you know?
Wow.
So yeah, my kid, who was like kind of deaf and a little bit mute, kept pointing where you lived, and I eventually went there, but then I went straight to the hospital, and then I had these unusual symptoms where I was constantly throwing up bile.
Ooh.
And a lot of memory issues, and they didn't know what it was at the hospital, but they kept me in for 14 days because they saw like all this. I was just like, they called me, what was that? There was like some cartoon or I don't know, some horror movie in those days of the guy who just kept on throwing up green. But anyways, for some unknown reason, I was just throwing up green bile, and I couldn't eat. And that was happening for weeks. And so, again, they didn't know what that was either. They thought that was maybe like a fish poisoning or food poisoning. But it wasn't, it was just, the neurologist said, oh, yeah, that, the nervous system can do all sorts of things with MS. And
how did you piece it together where you finally came upon the diagnosis that you had, that all these bizarre and peculiar symptoms were actually multiple sclerosis, and not Lyme disease or some other masquerading copper poisoning, mercury or whatever it could be, a whole myriad of things?
Well, I went to I was with my wife, and I was just driving on the wrong side of the road, and she was very like friendly about it, but she's like just curious, like, why are you driving on the wrong side of the road? And
I'm laughing. It's not too funny, but anyway.
Yeah, but she was very gentle about it, and I'm like, because are you just joking around? Because she knows I joke around a lot.
Right,
so
exactly.
I was just joking. And I don't know. And she's like, and I was like, you know what? Honestly, I don't know why I'm driving on the wrong side of the road. I don't know what side is the right road. And then she's like, that's that side. And then later I saw her, like a week later, she was reading a book, and it was called Early Onset Alzheimer's. And I was like, why are you reading that? She goes, there's something wrong with you.
Oh, boy.
And you're using the wrong pronouns, and you're driving on the side of the road, and so she should see someone. And then I'm like, I was kind of surprised. Like, I was the archetypal husband guy. I was like, I'm fine, And then I was like, okay, I'll see I'll see a neurologist. And I went to see a neurologist, and the neurologist looked at me, and I was walking fine. And he's like, oh, you're just anxious probably, And I'm like, I'm not really anxious. It's just like, I just don't know. He said, you're too young to have any cognitive problems. And I'm like, but he said, but then he did a physical exam, and when I started bending my neck, I started getting electrical shocks.
Right. You were telling me, you mentioned that symptom in your book, that it's a major, major symptom of possible MS.
It is. So then he did an MRI, and he called me up. He said, just to let you know, I'm really surprised, but you're going to have a diagnosis, and I want you to be mentally prepared before I see you. So, and then I came to his office, and he showed me, and he's like, you have a lot of lesions. I'm going to send you to an MS specialist. So then I went to an MS specialist. First one was just a family neurologist. And then he said, okay, for MS, you really need to see an MS specialist. So I went to an MS clinic, and then that doctor was my second neurologist. And then, ironically, my first neurologist died like a month later, and my second neurologist died like 5 months later. It was unrelated, but it was really bizarre. And then, so the third neurologist was like, uh-oh. You're like, but you're like,
The curse is on him, right? Oh boy.
yeah. But the second neurologist had treated MS for about 40 years, and he was an older gentleman, but he said in his 40 years of practice, he's never seen an MS patient with so many lesions. He says, I can't even count the amount of lesions you have. He said, I've never seen anyone with this amount of lesions on diagnosis. He said,
now, before you continue, let's talk a little bit about what is a lesion and what actually is MS for our listeners out there that they've heard. We've all heard the word many, many times, but not being physicians, they probably don't really have a good idea physiologically of what is going on with the brain and the nerves. And I think you painted a nice, simple, easy to understand picture in your book. There's no pill for this. So explain that to the listeners, what that meant by finding a lesion, and what does that have to do with how you feel and what's happening?
Well, a lesion is diagnosed on an MRI, and an MRI is a magnetic radiation. It's a machine where you go in a huge magnet, and it looks basically. It's a great machine which looks at your nervous system, looks at the nerves, and on this imagery, it's like an X-ray, but it's done with a magnet. There's parts where you'll see some color where it looks very white, and that's basically considered scar tissue. And that scar tissue is around the myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath is what coats the nerves. So it's electrical wiring. And wherever the electric wiring is damaged, they call it a scar, or also in MS, they call it a lesion. And that lesion is created by the body. The body is basically seeing the brain and the spinal cord as not part of its body, and it's attacking it. So it's kind of like arthritis. Instead of attacking the joints, it's attacking the brain and the spinal cord. And then wherever you have that lesion, the nerve signal doesn't get fast, and it gets impaired. So if it gets severely impaired, you can't. If it gets severely impaired, you can't walk, or if whatever part of that nerve affects it. So for me, I have a bad one on my cervical spine. And that affects my heart rate. So if I bend down quickly or even tie my shoes, I can go into bradycardia, which is low heart rate. So I can go low as I've been recommended to go to the emergency room at least 4 times in the last year from heart rate issues related to a lesion in the cervical spine and the brainstem.
So now these lesions, you mentioned that the myelin sheath, what's that made out of?
It's made out of fat. It's made out of saturated fat and omega fats. It's made a lot of different fats.
Does it have protein? Does it have protein? I'm curious as to what the immune system
it has protein.
is actually attacking. Like, kind of, what is it seeing that it thinks is something foreign?
It's a protein. It's amino acids. It's mostly amino acids and protein, and it's looking at that protein as a separate thing. It's the protein on the nerve. It's a protein, and one of the drugs is actually made out of amino acids as a peptide similar to the myelin sheath, and it's an injection called glatiramer acetate, and that's one of the first line defenses they use for MS. Is they're giving you basically, kind of ironically, a little bit of what the body appears to be myelin in an injection form, and then it decreases the attack on the myelin the body produces, and it has a beneficial effect.
So it's almost like a myelin vaccine in a way.
Kind of, yeah, or it distracts the antibodies somehow.
Interesting.
The real myelin, and it doesn't work forever. Most people take it for 5-10 years, and it's and with most of all these drugs, they help decrease the progression, but you still progress. So that's why it's not a pill. There's no pill for that which just makes it go away.
So that's kind of what spurned you. I've been reading in your book saying, hey, I'm not just a victim here. I'm a naturopathic physician, as you kind of tear off your shirt like Superman. Dun, dun, dun. I'm a naturopathic physician. And I'm trained to not understand about autoimmune disease. Actually, I'm one of the lecturers at your conference for many years talking about the genesis and the many theories of autoimmune disease. And I could, I teach rheumatology for many years at UB. There's many theories of why the body goes haywire that you discuss in your book. We could talk about a lot of them, from toxins to abnormal gut flora, to mercury toxicity, to even having some weird microorganisms, viruses, Lyme, other things like that, which maybe creates a little bit of a molecular camouflaging, molecular mimicry type of deal. So I know there's a lot of theories. What have you found in your massive amounts of reading to not only find out about your own illness, but also write the book?
Well, the interesting thing is about when there's a certain section of the book where I say, as a naturopath, we learned a lot about we learned about diet, and there's a neurologist who died, but he did something called the SWANK diet, where you low saturated fat and low fats. You take vitamin D3, you take a food allergy test, eliminate those foods. You don't eat sugar, all those kind of general naturopathic things. Mm-hmm. And I did acupuncture every day. I did Ayurveda. I went to Panchakarma, and man, it was just it was so humbling. I just kept on getting worse. And that's when I recognized oh wow, my naturopathic medical test wasn't really as much enough in the beginning. And just doing those things, vitamin D3, et cetera, really wasn't enough. And I got really worse, bad and quick. So that was my first experience, was humbling, was that really wasn't enough. But then I've kind of tried different things and ended up finding other things which were helpful. But at the end of the day, there's no pill for this means also that I don't know of any cases where someone's been cured for life. They have to go through it. They have to experience it. It's like gold age kind of thing, But I have found other things more helpful than just those things I mentioned before. But it's very humbling. I was like, I don't need your drug. I don't need your Copaxone, and I'll just take these things. And then 9 months later, I was like, I couldn't use my fingers and I couldn't think straight.
Yeah, I've seen similar. With many autoimmune diseases, lupus and scleroderma, that we need the best of both worlds of naturopathic and restorative medicine thinking. Maybe you can define that term in a sec, as well as conventional medicine, and kind of create a nice blend where one is really working with the other, not being toxic to the other, or not totally replacing the other in many cases. And that's, I think, what you found in your own personal journey, although everyone's different, individual. I've had some MS patients that have done extremely well and never saw a new lesion in their brain after I treated them. And then I've seen people go down the tube. So I think it's really depends on the individual, their constitution, and that's where individualism of medicine comes in, I think, different cases, because I think that there's probably 50 things that cause MS. I'm just throwing 50 out just as a general number. What combination and permutation is in you, the particular individual?
Right, and it's also worse. Usually, prognosis is usually worse in men. Prognosis is usually worse in if it's in the brainstem, and for me, I had in the brainstem, and I was a man, so I had certain factors which were worse. And also, while doing on this journey, they also accidentally or incidentally found I actually had lupus antibodies as well against lupus coagulation antibodies and antiphospholipid antibodies, which were really unusual. But it affects my affects like lipids against your phospholipids. Antibodies against your phospholipids.
Yeah, so it attacks the inside of your arteries and
your brain, because phospholipids are in your brain
too. Yeah, interesting.
So all those things were contributing to I think a poorer prognosis for sure.
So now, what did you do? What's your What's your program and workup? What types of tests did you do? Because I know you've tried many things from detoxification. Did you look at your heavy metal burden and look to see how much mercury you had in your body and things like that? Because I know that there's some evidence of mercury, and then there's a lot of research on vitamin D. Talk about the research and some of the correlations that have been found about MS.
Well, they found that vitamin D deficiency definitely contributes to the diagnosis of MS, and they found that people around the equator virtually don't get MS at all. So it's virtually non-existent in most of India and in Africa, and even in people in the south of the United States, Florida, Texas. But if someone is born and raised in a higher latitude where there's less sun, there's a much higher rate of MS, much, much more. But if they move after they're grown up to a sunnier place, it doesn't cure it at that point. It seems like it's like the gun has been shot. It's been triggered. So you'd be like, oh, let's just do it. Go to a sunny place. It's not as simple as that. But I think one thing to help prevent it is make sure that children are getting enough vitamin D3. That's definitely been shown to be true. And I think vitamin D3 and a therapeutic level of at a higher dose of over 10,000 IUs a day, which is I take, have shown that the brain atrophy of MS patients is less. So it definitely has a contributing factor. It's not going to cure it, but it's definitely something worth taking. It's not toxic, and it's simple, and it's cheap. Then heavy metals, yeah. So look at heavy metals. I did a DMSA challenge test. I didn't really find any mercury, but I found some lead, which is hard to get rid of. But I definitely took DMSA and make kind of way I look hindrances to health. So such as heavy metals, pollution, eating well, managing all those things definitely helps the platform to be better. But the things which I think made a big difference, I did fecal transplant implants. I did over 20 fecal implants. They get they get very healthy implants coming from the UK, where they're all tested and they all come from healthy, active people who have no health issues. No chronic issues. I did that, and that helped. Today, for example, when I woke up, I try to eat a healthy diet. I'm not eating frosted fruit flakes or whatever for breakfast. I ate some kasha, and then I coffee with no sugar. But then one of the things which I do is every morning I have a oxygen machine, and I go on a elliptical and take oxygen, and I take oxygen for 20 minutes, and that helps my oxygen levels go higher, because in interesting, they found that MS attacks, like in animal studies, can't occur if there's enough oxygen in the nerve. So really, for the brain, oxygen, that helps me a lot. I mean, I would say the oxygen machine and exercising on oxygen. It's called exercising while on oxygen therapy. It's called EWAT. It's a really healthy. That one has been really helpful. Vitamin D3, also a lot of the polyphenols have all shown to decrease the activation of the microglia in the brain. Inflammation, so like quercetin, rosemarynic acid, taking that every day, green tea, berries, all those are helpful. And I also take a drug twice a year. It's a monoclonal antibody which attacks the certain B cells which have been shown to attack the brain. That helps a lot. That was a game changer for cognitive function. And then I take a lot of turmeric and things which help the myelin sheath, like turmerones, which is essential oils in turmeric, and also peptides, which are injections, and they're called beta-thymosin and alpha-thymosin injections. And that I've noticed a big difference, because if I stop those, my symptoms do come back. It's not curative, but I have to take it. I take it 3 times a week, and that one is definitely shown to increase the oligodendrocytes in the brain, and I really noticed it. That one, the peptides, they're expensive, but they really help.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talked a little bit about in your book that there's a special mushroom called lion's mane. That's kind of interesting because I was just lecturing about lion's mane with my students in Bot Med, teaching them a little bit about lion's mane. Tell us a little bit about what you found about that, because I found that a mushroom that can help repair or at least help modify cognition is pretty amazing.
Yeah, so lion's mane, it's the fruiting body is there's a mushroom has the fruiting body and has the mycelium, and I actually did a study where my company put money into doing a clinical study on seeing the how many of the active compounds were in the mushrooms versus the mycelium, and ironically, it was an independent lab in the South related to the University of Virginia, and they couldn't find any active compounds in any of the mycelium products, but they found it only in the fruiting mushrooms.
So the myceliums are kind of like, that's like the roots that kind of dig into a log and
Right.
support the mushroom, and then eventually it fruits and forms the structure that we see as a mushroom, whether it's a maitake or a shiitake or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then it spores and then goes through its whole life cycle. So you're saying that the roots of the mushrooms really didn't have a lot of the active principles as compared to the body that we actually harvest.
According to the scientists, they couldn't find any detectable amounts. But a lot of them, the problem with the roots, they're so tiny and it's full of, and they're mostly in grains and food, like rice they're growing in. So most of the thing you're testing is rice, but they couldn't find any. But anyways, I took a lot of the mushrooms and capsule form. But what I found was I found there's local farmers in Vermont which grow it. So I eat it as a food. And I'd take a whole mushroom like this and cook it in a stir fry and cook it in soups. Last night I made a minestrone and put like half a cup of dried lion's mane mushrooms from the farm and I eat it as a food.
I heard you have to cook mushrooms to really activate the active constituents in them.
Yes, that's I don't know if this. Lion's mane is very soft. It's like it's so mushy. I think that's really true for like the ones which has a lot of cellulose, which is really hard, like reishi. But I'm not sure if that's totally true for lion's mane or not. I mean, I think it definitely seems like it would be true for the hard mushrooms.
Well, that's cool. So you found that doing these types of things seems to be helping you. Now, you also mentioned a little bit about rosmarinic acid, and that's an interest of both ourselves because we've developed interesting products with rosmarinic acid. That's interesting. I in my research, I found out that the rosmarinic acid can actually kill the abnormal B cells without killing the and T cells too, without killing the healthy B and T cells. So that's kind of an amazing property.
Yeah, it is. Rosmarinic acid is a polyphenol which is found in almost all the mint families. So it's found in lemon balm, it's found in peppermint, it's found in, but the highest concentration is in rosemary, and rosemary is about 1%, and in lemon balm it's about 0.5%. It's a constituent which is very helpful.
But you have to do things. Well. One thing that's interesting, Dr. Friedman, is you have to do herbs the right way, and a lot of people don't do herbs the right way. Like I was just reading, I'm actually doing a lecture for your group in another week or so on, ways to help with cancer for training in your herbal certification program that you guys do. And I was reading about the evidence-based doses of some of these herbs to help people are like 60 grams a day. Now, for listeners that have no idea what that means, that would be like if you go to the health food store and you pick up your average tincture, that's usually like you're getting 1 gram of herb per teaspoon of the tincture. So you basically need to take 60 teaspoons of tincture a day to get as much herbs as you need. You'd be really drunk.
Yes, no, it's true. That's true. I mean, I think a lot of people always assume it's going to work just because it's the dose which is important.
Like the amount of herbs are actually in that medicine, and you have to be sure if you want to be a good, successful herbalist, naturopath, or whatever, you have to make sure that you're approaching those therapeutic doses. And I know that there's ways to concentrate the herbs so that you don't have to take as much of that actual tincture. You can really concentrate those herbs down to where at 1 teaspoon is equal to 30 grams of the herbs. So now you only have to take 2 teaspoons of that tincture a day if you wanted to do something therapeutic.
Yeah, so a tincture, there's, when you said it's 1 gram, there's 1 gram per in a teaspoon, and a 5 ml teaspoon is what would be considered a 1 to 5, and that's a tincture.
Right.
Now, if you want to go into a powder, you can keep on concentrating it and drying it and heating it and putting it through a spray dryer. So you can turn it around where it eventually becomes 1 gram to 1 ml. And eventually, what you could do is like the Rosemarynic Acid. They're using it's about literally 100 to 1. So for that one, they're using 100 kilograms of dried rosemary to make 1 kilogram of Rosemarynic Acid. So it's probably more expensive than a kilo of cocaine. I mean, I never bought cocaine but it's really expensive. It's like I got some in the mail for the company, and it was like I got this box, and it was like the customs on it. It was like $5,000. I'm like, what kind of powder is that? And I'm like, it's rosemary.
Wow. Yeah.
It's the most expensive ingredient. I think it's probably the most expensive ingredient in the supplement industry that I know of. That's why most companies put only like small amounts in it, because it's so expensive.
But then it doesn't do much, like which is what I'm basically my point is there. Yeah.
Right, totally.
What about antioxidants? We know that at the level of the cell, when we look at this goes back to naturopathic philosophy that Lust said. The father of naturopathic medicine said there's only one disease, and that's a disease of the cell. So when we get down to the cellular biology, when we have destruction of cells, we're releasing too many free radicals, and we can't quench them fast enough so that they destroy the normal tissue. Even our white blood cells, like you mentioned, microglia, for those that don't know what that term is, those are the white blood cells in the brain, right, that are doing the actual destruction. So they're releasing a lot of these free radicals, which because probably they think that the myelin sheath is like a virus or bacteria. So they're trying to destroy it because they think it's foreign. And then you don't have enough antioxidants to kind of slow down that destructive process, because it turns out the microglia release hydrogen peroxide and other types of things like that to destroy what they think is foreign. And supposedly you're supposed to have a lot of antioxidants to kind of sop up that hydrogen peroxide before it starts to destroy your healthy tissue. So there's a lot of research on, of course, oxidative stress, we call it in naturopathic medicine, oxidative stress and autoimmune disease. Have you had any success doing lots of antioxidants? I think you talked about in your book, there's no pill for this, that there's high levels of free radicals found in the brain of patients with multiple sclerosis.
Right, so part of my regimen every day is antioxidants. So I think it's important to make sure your glutathione levels are high or strong and high enough. And I think it's debatable, really, what's the best way to do that, because some people say take glutathione itself as an injection or take it orally. But I have a buddy who's a naturopath and who's a chemical engineer, and he did the research, and it really doesn't look like taking glutathione really increases the red blood cell in the cell itself more than actually taking N-acetylcysteine and the precursors. So I take N-acetylcysteine every day, 1 or 2 grams a day to increase the glutathione production. I take milk thistle, which is a herb which helps glutathione as well. And then vitamin D is an antioxidant. PQQ, I take that. And I try to eat lots of vegetables. I mean, like Terry Walls is a physician who has progressive MS, and her thing is just eat tons and tons of vegetables. So I think it's like 10 servings of vegetables a day, which I find hard to consume that. But I do eat a lot of fruits and vegetables and berries. I try to keep but I think a good goal for me is like your plate, to have half a plate of vegetables a day at least per meal. So a lot of fruits and vegetables and organic, and all those. I think that's great. And then a lot of things like, for example, we have chickens, and we have chickens here, and we get the eggs, and they're eating grass, and they're full of antioxidants and omega oils, versus like industrial egg, which is all white. So it's full of carotenes, and so diet is a big part of it, and eating organic and working with getting, we have part of a CSA where we get community agriculture, and those things are all part of it, I think.
What about healthy fats? Because if your myelin sheath is fats, you can eat really bad fats, or you can eat super healthy fats. And then also, do people absorb their fats? That's a whole other issue. The old naturopathic saying, you are what you absorb, optimize absorption,
So I think fats are very important. I like, first, organic. I don't like fats which are not extracted with toxic solvents is important. Not heating the oils is important. We're not deep frying them and heating them on lower heat. Having enough of them. So things which I consume regularly are avocados, coconut oil, organic, also omega oils, fish oils, olive oil. I mean, the Mediterranean diet is shown to be so helpful in so many ways. And one of the things about the Mediterranean diet, I think it's like 12. I don't remember. It's like 6 tablespoons of olive oil a week or something like that, and 12 raw garlics a week. So
cure everything, right?
Yeah. So I mean, olive oil, garlic, lots of pestos, and raw input. And the ideal thing is like cook your vegetables without too much oil, and then add the olive oil after it's cooked. That's when it's medicinal. So I think fats are very important. And I know some doctors said they have gotten good results with the swank diet, which is they lower the saturated fat. But for me, that didn't help. I really think I needed saturated fat as well. So as long as it's good quality and not fried. And the brain is a huge part of the brain is saturated fat as well. So it's important that it's
yeah. So the Schwank
came
out. Dr. Schwank came out with this diet many years ago and showed that it, in certain people, it maybe had some success, but in your case, it didn't seem to help too much.
No, I think eating other fats, and but he also talked about it in a time where they didn't even know about really omega oils, and didn't know about the benefit of like there is a function for saturated fats too.
Now, what about hormones? They play a big role in you. It's interesting. You mentioned this term, which the first time I heard it was actually at one of the conferences with a lecturer named Carol, who we ended up having dinner with that time at that Indian restaurant a couple of years ago in Burlington. And she was talking about neurosteroids, and she was talking about, especially this one called pregnenolone being amazing for the brain. But there's a whole host of, like in school, we kind of learn, these steroids were for sexual function. We didn't really understand, maybe when I went to naturopathic school, which was a really long time ago, I guess, these have a very powerful effect on the brain.
Absolutely. I mean, well, like, yeah, we used to think of like hormones like some are female, some are male, and I mean,
Right.
basically all hormones are in male and female. They're just different amounts, and we have all the same hormones, and females have the same hormones. We just have different concentrations of them. They all have a function, and like, for example, the when an infant is born, it's really floppy. You know, when a baby is born, it can't sit up or hold its head up. The reason it can't hold its head up is because it doesn't have the myelin sheath yet.
Oh.
And what stimulates the myelin sheath is thyroid hormones, and that's what produces, and that's why children who don't have a fully developed brain, with iodine deficiency, was cretinism, which was because they couldn't create the myelin sheath, because there wasn't enough iodine to produce thyroid hormones. So thyroid hormones it triggers the myelin to turn into myelin. So it's a very important cofactor. And they've used thyroid hormones in premature infants to help with a myelination. And that's one way you can help a premature infant to survive, is actually giving thyroid hormones. So there's a lot of different hormones which affect the myelin. But I think the main one is thyroid. But there's also pregnenolone. These neurosteroids will help communicate in the body and communicate nervous systems. So pregnenolone, DHEA, testosterone has helped with some of the cognitive function issues in MS patients. And it's also interesting that estrogen, especially estriol, it is protective. So like MS patients and women, MS is usually better prognosis for a woman. And although it's much higher rate of MS in women, they find that there's a protective aspect of these female hormones, and that's why they get a better prognosis. And when women get pregnant, most MS patients go in remission.
A lot of autoimmune disease, that's true. But on the same token, I've heard that, like for arthritis, when estrogen goes high in men, that creates autoimmunity, because it turns out the B and T cells have this. Well, I guess what happens is the estrogen can be made into this, what they call clastogenic, DNA damaging type of estrogen, which they call estrogen catecholquinones, and then that damages the DNA and causes, can cause cancer, I guess, but it certainly causes double-stranded DNA damage and some of the some of the lupus markers. But that's not true for all, like you said, for all autoimmune diseases. Some estrogen is good, and it depends maybe the type of estrogen, E1 versus estrogen 2 versus estrogen 3. So it's kind of interesting.
There's a lot we don't know.
Yeah.
I think I start off with my book and end with my book. There's so much we know about MS, but we don't know how to cure it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, fascinating. Well, what about how it's just impacted your life? We have about maybe 10 minutes left in the program. Like, how have you managed with it, as far as you certainly run some important companies, but it must be hard when, you're not thinking straight, or you can't function for that particular day, or you can't exercise that day, or there's other lifestyle things. What advice can you have for listeners out there that have MS or have loved ones with MS?
Well, in my last chapter, one of my last chapters of the book, it said something which my meditation teacher said, which was, expect nothing, accept everything.
I love it.
Because you really don't have any expectations and just accept everything. And I think that attitude of acceptance, and not to catastrophize whatever is happening, because you're like, I've had some serious things happen where I didn't even know who I was. And I was like, when it was happening to me, I'm like, oh, it's kind of fun. I don't even know who I am. I'm like, it's fun for a minute. But I was like, then I started getting anxious. I was like, what happens when I started recognizing who I was, I was like, oh, this could be really scary. Like, what happens if I never come back? You know, like what happens if I never remember who I am? Like then I start getting anxious and worried, and that creates a lot of. So I think trying not to react to whatever's happening, because for MS, symptoms come and go, and they pass often. Not all symptoms, but they change. So it's like you need a day off. You just need a day off. You have to take care of yourself. And there's some things which, like it's really, like visual recognition is very hard for me for certain things. So like my wife has signs in the house like big spoons or big cups. My kids they think it's funny, but I don't know which persons, I can't recognize. So they just think I'm silly, and I'm like, you're silly, Papa. He doesn't know which toothbrush belongs to what person, So like, okay. But I just kind of have to roll with it, and just accept it, and it's humbling, and but one of my neurologists said was she was really surprised how persistent I was, because she goes, a lot of people just give up and go on disability under your situation, and she goes, they just get depressed, and the best thing is to work as much as you can, as long as you can, because it's like, this is our life. If you only have, I write in my book, like if you only have 10 cents, if when you have a hard time talking, you have to use your words wisely. If you have a hard time thinking, you have to use your thoughts wisely, So, use your time wisely and try to. Fortunately, I'm not a depressive person, so I haven't got depressed about it. But it's a serious thing for a lot of people's depression with MS, So I think try to stay positive, try to stay active as much as possible, and, not to catastrophize it and complain too much about it.
I know you have some great life lessons there. Like you mentioned, I'm not really in control of anything in life. I need to sit back and just let life kind of unfold and accept things. Don't take things for granted. You mentioned in your book, yeah. I'm more than my body. What does that mean?
Well, so there's definitely things where I can't do things where I want. Like, you have an intention, you have a volition. There's times where I can't. There's times where I couldn't even talk. I mean, my vocal cords didn't work. There's times where I couldn't swallow. I'm like, I'm hungry, but I can't eat. I can't talk. Or I can't walk. I mean, there's times where literally I can't walk, and then there's other times where I can go downhill skiing. But like, if I just reduce my whole existence to what my body can do, then I'd be pretty depressed a lot of times, because we have a spirit, we have a mind, we have consciousness, we have, it's beautiful to be in existence, and I mean, can be happy just to exist and do, there's a lot to think about other than just whether my arm's working or my leg's working. It's too reductionist.
I see. Yeah. That's very true. Are there any frequently asked questions, or is there anything you'd like to add in the last 4 minutes of the program here, Dr. Friedman? And we need to tell you about, let's stop you for a sec. So this is published by Chelsea Green. It's called There's No Pill for This, a Naturopathic Physician's Personal Prescription for Managing Multiple Sclerosis. Dr. Michaël Friedman. Improve your quality of life with diet, hormone, supplements, exercise, other lifestyle factors. I guess you can get it anywhere, which is great. It just was published.
Yep, it's on Barnes and Noble, Amazon, and all that.
Right.
UK publisher, actually. So it's.
But any closing thoughts?
My closing thought is like, our job is to do the best we can. And the rest is up to the universe or God or however you see it. Just do the best we can, and that's what you have to focus on, and not focus on, like, I think MS is a quest to try to feel whole when other parts aren't working, but we can still feel whole even when our body's not all functioning at the same time and working properly.
And you certainly, by discussing your case, your struggles, made the book very personal, which is what I kind of liked about it. You can pick up a book and it's all about, very reductionistic and it's from an outsider's viewpoint, but you kind of wrote it from the the personal expression, which is really brave of you to do that. It's really very admirable. But I figured someone like yourself would do that. Kind of come forward and really help people, and then you give some great ideas for what possibly people can take, like what supplements do I do. You kind of discuss a lot of the medications, which is really important too, because you probably have to co-manage this with things, and lifestyle things to do, and then also talk about some other therapies like bee sting therapy and some other things like that, which I've read also copper is very good too. Copper is important for the myelin sheath, so it's interesting that patients get a good zinc to copper idea. They have to do different testing to figure out that.
I think one last thing I'll mention is that it's important not to be prejudiced against, like, some people are prejudiced against regular medicine, some people are prejudiced against alternative medicine or natural medicine. I just be open-minded to both. But the one thing I would be cautious about also is, like with regular medicine, not to go into the use as little as you need, because they do have side effects. So it's easy, like if you have all these symptoms, each doctor would be like, I'll try this, and you suddenly, like, a lot of MS patients I've known are literally on 15 pharmaceuticals, one drug to fall asleep, one drug to wake up, one drug to this, and one drug for that. And it causes side effects than it's worth. So using just the least amount to get better, to help, is what you want. Not, don't go on to the, 10 drugs. I think it's counterproductive when you start taking too many drugs too. But so use it wisely.
Well, have a wonderful day, Dr. Friedman. It's been great
to
see you again. And that does it for another edition of The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z. We want you to stay healthy, folks. Nice. Good to see you, and Happy New Year to everyone. Our first program of the new year, I think. Yeah. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye-bye.